Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm going to start screen sharing now. Hopefully, everybody should see a screen with the book and a few quotes, including one from John Moore that I'm sure you guys all recognize. And I appreciate this opportunity to come and speak with the IoT Security Foundation folks today. Like you mentioned, I've done a keynote at one of your events in the past, and it was really good, really informative for me to learn and engage with all of you, to understand better what you're doing, how you're doing it. And I think that's partly why one of the inspirations for this book was how could we help manufacturers understand security research, security researchers, and adversarial mindsets. So you might be asking, do we really need another book about hacking? I pulled a bunch of hacker book images from Amazon earlier this morning, and there's a lot of books about hacking. There's a lot of good books about hacking. But as you all know, IoT is not IT, and most of the books about hacking out there are how to hack IT systems. They're how to hack, things that are just software, or in some cases, things that are web applications, mobile applications. There's some hardware-specific hacking books where you get really down into the weeds of hacking hardware. But there's actually very few around hacking IoT devices. There are a handful, and there's 2 or 3 really good ones. I'm happy to say that I think ours is a really good one, but I'm biased. But I want to dig into this a little bit and show why it's important. And I know that this is a review for most of you, so I won't spend too much time on this. But with the Internet of Things, there are many, many different characteristics. And one of the most important ones, I believe, are that the consequences of hacking IoT devices can be much different than the consequences of hacking IT systems. And the security vulnerabilities, the security impacts, the failure modes have in most cases with IoT, depending on how you define it, the consequences are very different. So if your credit card number gets stolen through a hack, you can change that. If your password gets stolen, you can change that. If somebody manages to compromise a medical device and does harm to a patient, you can't change that. That's irreversible, irrevocable. One of the things that we looked into in this book is treadmills, and we found a treadmill that was very hackable. It would get up to, I think, 17 or 18 miles an hour. And you might think, treadmills, everybody's got one, nobody actually uses them. But actually, we looked at some statistics, and there were hundreds of head injuries a year from people falling off of treadmills that went too fast, or they couldn't stop, or where they just got dizzy and passed out. That's what happens when accidents touch treadmills, let alone adversaries. Because the consequences are different, the adversaries are different. They'll act differently. You have some adversaries who will stay away from harm. You have some adversaries who will seek to leverage harm, and you don't have to look too much farther than all of the ransomware that's happened in healthcare in the last few years to know that some adversaries actively seek out situations that can harm people because they know that they'll get a better return on whatever their particular goal is, whether that's financial gain or nation state objectives. The contexts of IoT are very different. So, with software, you tend to have an IT team that's built around it, right? So in an enterprise, you'll have IT security folks. But if you're driving in a car down the road, number one, you're mobile. So the teams that you have to carry with you have to be in the car. And 2, you usually don't have an IT team in a car. If you do, it's an extraordinary circumstance. And even when you do, they're not usually able to start working on the device if it gets compromised or if there's a security issue. The economics are obviously very different. You have very large systems. in healthcare in particular, I focus a lot on healthcare. In healthcare, you have very large, very expensive systems. In home IoT, you have very, very small, very inexpensive systems. Um, and the components that go into them are also themselves very inexpensive. So if you tried to add $1 worth of security to each of the chips that go into an IoT device, you're very quickly going to price yourself way out of the market. And then the time scales are different. So both in the short term, you have more real-time harms from consequences of security failures. In addition, these devices tend to live much longer than other devices. You might replace a phone or a software package every couple of years, but when was the last time you replaced your router? I know I've had mine for about 6 or 7 years, and it's getting a little bit long in the tooth. The average lifetime of a car on the road is something like 11 years. Now, there's a lot of really good guidance for protecting and defending IoT security. And the IoT Security Foundation has a lot of good documents on this. But I looked, and there's not a lot of good documents on how to do testing against IoT devices, how to emulate adversaries, how to understand, to think like them. So what we tried to do, and I think we managed to do it. I'm happy to talk a lot more in the question and answer session about it. But we want to get to, how can engineers understand the failure modes so that people who are not trained in security, everybody or a lot of the folks on this call have a security mindset already. But how about the engineers in your organizations if you're designing these devices? Do they understand how IoT devices can fail and what the consequences are? For the developers, software developers in particular, how are adversaries going to look at those devices when they get a hold of them? For managers, how can you support the security projects? And for the security teams, how can you get your managers to support the efforts that you're putting into this? And then for companies, how can you build security in early on so that the number and severity of vulnerability disclosures is greatly lessened? As most of the folks on this call, I'm sure know, the cost of implementing security capabilities, if it's designed early in, is much greater than the cost of fixing them later. And we did an Amazon Ask Me Anything, or a Reddit Ask Me Anything a couple of months ago, where we got 450 comments, and a lot of them were something like, well, why are you teaching criminals how to break into IoT devices? Don't you feel irresponsible about that? And something that I think is particularly relevant to this audience is that not all people who are, call themselves hackers are criminals. In fact, the vast majority are not. The so-called security researchers, the ethical hacking community, the folks that go out to DEF CON, if you can see the flag behind me, they're really driven by something other than criminals or nation states. By and large, most hackers, most security researchers got into this because they were curious. They had that kind of puzzler mindset. They wanted to take things apart, put them back together, see how they work. They wanted to protect, once they found out they could break things, they wanted to protect people who might come to harm, whether that's from privacy implications, whether that's physical harm. Many of them, got good at it, and it felt nice to be really good at something. And so they had pride of purpose. They were doing something important, and they were getting good and getting better. So that drives a lot of people. Some of them were looking for jobs or had current jobs, and this was a way to get better. Some of them were out to protest, or they wanted to defend the nation. They had some ideological purpose. So I think understanding why security researchers will do these things will help you understand how to work with them when you're opening up security programs to them, when you're inviting them in coordinated vulnerability disclosure policies, like IoT Security Foundation advocates for. So you know how to pull them in. You know that when somebody comes in, even if they send a malformed message that looks maybe like they're trying to do something more criminal, that you can figure out what's really driving that interest, what's really driving that person to disclose something to you. And so that, if you're like any number of organizations, you'll invite some of these security researchers in, maybe hire them, maybe have somebody on staff, or maybe, offer them the ability to come in or at an event to get their hands on one of your devices to find security vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities and report them to you early. But more than anything, I think we wrote this book so that we could teach people how to safely and lawfully investigate potential security issues. So there's a clever turn of phrase, hacker's gonna hack. So if hackers gonna hack, if security researchers are gonna research security, then how can we ensure that they're doing so safely and lawfully? And so the whole first chapter of the book is about how to understand the consequences, how to understand those differences between IoT and IT security. We've got write-ups from Dr. Marie Moe talking about how, as a pacemaker patient and a security researcher, it's critically important that people follow certain guidance and guidelines so that they don't, when they find something, go straight out to the media with those findings, that they coordinate with the manufacturers, report to them, and then maybe go public with it after it's been fixed. We had a couple of folks, including David Rogers, write for us about on the legal implications of IoT security and some of the changes to legislation, some of the changes to the public policy landscape around IoT security, so that we could help impress upon the security researchers that it's important to do it right, so that when you're dealing with them, you'll have hopefully a better idea that they are coming to you out of some sense of protector, or puzzler, or pride and prestige to get things fixed, rather than just to see their name in the headlines. We also believe that that intro chapter will help particularly managers, executives, understand the consequences of cybersecurity. So it'll make it easier for you internally to get support for some of the projects you want to do to improve security, if you're able to help them understand why it's important, how the landscape is changing, not just the threat landscape, but the regulatory landscape is changing, and then be able to win that support to get the budget you need to properly secure and update the systems that you're building out. So here are just a few of the topics that we cover. One of the ones that I think is really unique is the IoT threat modeling component. So there are only a very few resources available on threat modeling that are, good, solid, publicly available resources, and very few of those cover IoT. Most of them cover, corporate enterprise networks. Operational security in an enterprise network is very different from IoT security, designing and developing a product, because you have to assume that it will be put into some type of a more hostile environment than the environment that you intend it to, right? That's just what happens. People take their IoT webcam and expose it directly to the internet, even if your instruction manuals and instructions for use say don't do that. People are going to do it. So how do you think through threat modeling, what environments these will be put into? And then we've got a whole host of other things that we touch on. I believe we're the first information out there on LoRaWAN. So if you're building devices that do that, you can check that information out and see how, again, security researchers and how adversaries might look at those types of technologies. And then we're going to have a little bit more time later to talk in more depth. If we've got any time left in this session, I'm happy to take a question or two. Otherwise, we'll help the team get a little bit ahead of schedule today.
So, Beau, we do have one question which probably you might be able to answer fairly quickly, and that's from Dan Fowler. Okay. Thank you, Dan. Beau, are there any emerging IoT devices that maybe of security interest security-wise? So that sounds like they're kind of not necessarily the top 10, but are there any particular ones on your mind? Hopefully, Dan, I've done your question justice.
Well, it's a good question. I used to track a lot of the emerging IoT devices, but there's just too many of them now. In general, anything that has electricity is going to get computers pretty quickly, and it's going to be connected to the internet pretty quickly. That's the expanding attack surface of IoT in general. Um, so I think one of the things that we looked at is what emerging technologies or capabilities are going into IoT. Uh, we looked at, for instance, a hackable water bottle, and when even water bottles, like things, water and electricity don't mix. You should probably never put electronics in your water bottle or in your water. But like when even water bottles have IoT components to them, everything's eventually going to get it. So instead of looking at the individual devices or emerging devices, we wanted to look at the capabilities so that we could, at a reductivist perspective, look at the components, look at the elements, look at the technologies, so that then when you're building something like a water bottle, you're doing it in a way and with technologies that are, generally speaking, better and more securable. And then you can lay security on top of that securable infrastructure so that you can get better. I hope that didn't seem like I was dodging the question, but it's just too hard to keep up. If you've got any ideas of emerging IoT devices we should look at, certainly send them my way.
Oh, there's a question from Aaron, which may be more related to privacy than anything else, about Sidewalk. It says, "Are you worried about
Yeah.
Sidewalk?" This is the Amazon.
Yeah. I've had a few people ask me about that, and it's interesting. I was reading something. There was an article that said like why you shouldn't be worried about Sidewalk, and it gave me some things I didn't know. Apparently, it's only going to be really low bandwidth connectivity for only a few different things. It's not going to be quite as invasive as some of the more bombastic headlines made it out to be. I'll say in general, it seems very worrisome that without an opt-in rather than opt-out process, a manufacturer with as many deployed devices as Amazon has is just going to open those devices up to more and more attack surface, more and more potential end nodes that you have to worry about. So that's my gut reaction. In reality, Wi-Fi can be hacked within the range of hackable, within the range of radio frequency, right? So there's a little bit of physical security, physical perimeter that dampens the potential impact of it. My apartment is on the 10th floor, so somebody on the sidewalk probably won't actually be able to reach my Amazon device. Even if they can, Amazon has actually done a lot of good engineering, from what I understand, to build a more secureable platform in their Alexa devices, in some of the other devices. So I think it's creepy as hell. I don't know that there's a hard security vulnerability or flaw that I can point to as the reason why I think we should not use it, or try and get them to pull that back in. But I think there could be other things, and privacy is one of those that I think is certainly potentially concerning. I wait to see what security researchers will do to pull that apart and to deconstruct their protocols and to find issues in them. So I guess watch this space for more ammunition to, if you think it's a terrible idea, watch this space for more ammunition to try and get it off your networks. If you think it's a great idea, then watch this space for things you'll need to do to update to ensure that it's secure and private. We're not really, authors never get rich, or at least very few authors get rich. So we didn't do this to make money. We did it to get word out. And so it's great to see so many folks have bought copies and are using it. There's also some free chapters. I think if you go to No Starch Press, you can get a better feel for it.